This podcast is supported by Secretly Society, a record club offering the best new albums in exclusive, limited edition vinyl colours, delivered to your door each month, with perks like free shipping, members-only discounts, and first dibs on rare finds. Secretly Society is a record club for new collectors and crate diggers alike. Sign up and become a member wherever you are in the world. Just head on over to secretlystore.com.
My name is Grayson Haver Currin. In the summer of 2005, I graduated from college in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I was writing about music for a local newspaper, and 3 months later, a band of 4 friends and then all their buds moved to town, and soon enough, they became my favorite band. Their name was DeYarmond Edison, and the band's members were Brad Cook, Phil Cook, Justin Vernon, and Joe Westerlin. They also became some of my best friends, and their music and their friendship changed my life. They broke up a year later, and that year of their existence was a period of intense artistic ambition for them. They tried to change their sound, they tried to change how they worked with one another, and that eventually ended up breaking them apart. And more or less the moment they broke up, they started 2 different bands. Megafaun, who made these incredibly strange folk rock records, and the other was Bon Iver. So after that, I pitched these guys and said, the music you made together as the band DeYarmond Edison has never really come out in a proper way. So we should fix that. And 4 years later, we're finally fixing that. Epoch is a 5 LP, 4 CD box set with a ridiculously long book that I wrote about my friends and what they did together and what they've since done apart. Chapter 9. Summer was going to be busy for DeYarmond Edison. An annual springtime festival in Raleigh, dubbed Superfest, was as stacked as it was casual. DeYarmond Edison was loose and carefree there. The vexation of the van ride from Wisconsin momentarily just a memory. Justin swigged deeply from a brown bottle before the band launched into "I've Been Drinking," which they screamed and strummed as if they were actually trying to lure the cops. Dancing with his banjo, Phil was ecstatic to be playing Southern music in a backyard space in the South. It felt illicit, a little like the all-night juke joints they'd studied. Joe's take on note oppression in Heaven was especially tender, buttressed by Phil's sharp slide guitar and Brad's acoustic guitar. Justin stared down at the banjo, stopping and starting and peering at Phil as if he wanted to ask a question about the tuning. But DeYarmond Edison's Saturday night triumph at Superfest came at an especially uncertain time. As Raleigh began to warm up again, they knew they couldn't stay in their old house. Their first North Carolina summer there was a scorcher. Massive holes in the air conditioning infrastructure meant it would suck in dirt and spray it through the house, a problem the landlord refused to fix. For what it's worth, the landlord declined to comment. They had to leave. So in mid-May, as it became clear they would never again see their security deposit, they decided to bail on the final month's rent. The house's 2 couples, Brad and Katie, Phil and Heather, moved together 3 miles west into a modest stone cottage at the boundary between a quiet neighborhood and a busy highway. Justin moved in the opposite direction, joining Christy in her small home on Farrell Drive, a short and inexplicably unpaved street in one of Raleigh's nicest forested neighborhoods. By that point, Christy and Justin had been dating for 4 months or so, and Nola's debut album, produced by Justin, was nearly complete. They converted a spare rear bedroom into a makeshift studio where they'd finished the record, and finally began DeYarmond Edison's first new work as a North Carolina band.
That transition of making those decisions, I remember had a lot of contentious conversations around it of well, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. It felt clear that there's some shit going on.
The band's third residency set at Bickett had felt redundant, and they no longer felt beholden to the space or the concept. They decided to bail and turn instead to recording. As everyone settled into their new homes, they began considering what they would record and how it might sound. The residency's vocal exercises prompted an important and overdue realization. If everyone in the band could sing, couldn't they also write? Perhaps, they realized, they all had something to say. Phil wrote Baby Done Got Your Number, a simple lament of jilted lovers, to tap that same unmitigated approach to singing. Inspired by the prison records of Lomax, the song had a simple communal structure. Each member shouted out a line, and the rest of the band responded as they stomped, clapped, and hooted in unity. Brad, too, reacted to that group singing ideal, but the result couldn't have been more different. Recognizing the quartet's rising tension and the sense that Justin was starting to drift, he eulogized the brotherly bond in a gentle folk song rich with geographic symbolism. Invoking the folk song The Longest Train, he wrote about belonging in the pines and the need to ignore the needle pointing north. Ever the de facto tour manager, Brad even used the song to promise future adventures together, with the idea of a new course plotted on an unrolled map, meant literally and metaphorically.
It's your sinking divide.
Just as he released Hazelton's in its paltry edition, Justin again submitted Song for a Lover of Long Ago to the band. And they decided to finally record Epoch, an elliptical song about the second chances that near-death experiences offer, couched in deep-sea diving metaphors.
Looking up at the waves.
They also began reimagining Heroin, one of the hookiest and most direct songs from Silent Signs. While keeping a simple rhythm, Joe webbed layers of scabrous noise behind Justin's exasperated falsetto. Brad's thick bass and Phil's spectral keyboards framed the scene in psychedelic colors, suggesting some outtakes from Miles Davis's On the Corner sessions. It was imperfect but inspired, showing their willingness to rewrite their own basic rules. Just as recording began in late May, Justin and Christy left for Wisconsin. In their house on Farrell, Christy had shown Justin the television series Northern Exposure, an early 90s cult classic in which a doctor is dispatched to an Alaskan village to practice. The wintry scenes and rural characters reminded Justin of the landscape and people he loved back home. For the new couple, heading north felt a little like a pilgrimage. In early June, Justin realized something was wrong, not with DeYarmond Edison per se, but with him. Playing a show, Justin realized he was sick, sluggish, and spiking a high fever.
It was just mega lethargic. My back was totally out of whack because my liver had swollen up so much. It was just a lot of dreams, a lot of sweat, a lot of laying around.
I think it was terrifying.
Yeah.
It felt so dark because Vern was in such a dark place.
Yeah.
You know, I really remember that whole summer felt super dark.
What's more, Justin soon received a call from back home. His dad, Gil, was building each of his kids a one-room cabin, tucked deep into the woods of the family's land an hour outside of Eau Claire. When he was building Justin's cabin, no, not that cabin, he fell from a ladder and lay there alone for hours, waiting for help. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital with broken ribs and vertebrae, a broken wrist, and blood clots. Already selling his belongings for cash on Craigslist, Justin couldn't afford to go back home. He worried about his dad from afar while navigating a health crisis of his own.
It was the first time anything like that had ever happened to my parents. So it was really weird to be far away. I know my dad's going to not die right now, but he could have. I had no money. I lost it all playing online poker sitting in my bed.
Still, the band was ready to work.
There was this excitement that I was like, this is the first record we're really going to make. From start to finish. Like, Silent Signs, the first DeYarmond record, all the Mount Vernon shit. That was Eau Claire shit. We never made a record down here. We never really started to do new recordings until Epoch and Where We Belong. And it was starting to feel really exciting. It was also exactly when it broke, because we couldn't decide what kind of cool shit to do.
It began well. They belted out Baby Done Got Your Number with more gusto than those songs at Bickett. They sound proud to have learned how to write music this way, rather than simply recreate the songs of prisoners not given the dignity of names. The previous Christmas, Justin received a fiddle, which he'd slowly been learning and which he'd proudly hung from the bedroom studio's wall. He pulled it down for Where We Belong, Brad's elegy for the flagging friendship, adding a violin drone that felt like a sepia-toned take on Tony Conrad's microtonal work.
Be still, let the journey bring calm winds and a song.
They sang it beautifully too, 4 voices blending over a wistful mix of banjo, guitar, and violin. You could barely make out each member. They seemed to have merged into one, subsuming the very idea of a frontman in the process. As it stretched beyond 9 minutes, the song morphed into a sublime instrumental. Phosphorescent electric guitar smoldering over Joe's slow, sophisticated canter. In Eau Claire, they'd taken their song Set Me Free on 10-minute blues rock rides. This was different, a proof of concept that they could combine imaginative improvisation with sturdy songs.
I think I was looking more for like what's coming out of the Bickett stuff. Like what are we actually like pulling together? And that EP that we recorded together felt like a good step, but it was also kind of just like these are songs. We're back in song world,
Sure.
you know. But the recording aspect of it felt really adventurous.
Song for a Lover of Long Ago provided another opportunity to take that step together. Justin's Hazelton's renditions was monastic and tortured, his anguished voice groaning over a slow acoustic guitar. When DeYarmond Edison played it as a quartet at the Mabel Tainter, the band added mostly subtle accents. A scraped cymbal or a chimed bell, a wispy electronic aura and bowed glockenspiel, a stately piano melody.
Cleaning watermark.
The end of Song for a Lover of Long Ago is the most gratuitous moment on Hazelton's, an otherwise efficient exercise of ideas. The EP's version is smarter. At the end, a crackling voice slowly rises beneath the layered long tones and tinkling percussions. That's the first few lines of Epoch, mutated by cassette playback. The tape clicks off just before Epoch itself begins. A clever segue and another sign that the band that had struggled with Epoch for a year by the point they recorded it in July was growing. At their first Eau Claire CD release show for Silent Signs, the one where they wore suits and sat on the stage of the Masonic Temple, they premiered the tune. Still so embryonic, Justin glanced occasionally at the lyrics glowing from his MacBook screen. Here, Epoch depends on multiple tiny moments of tension and release. Time and again, layers of banjo, voice, and drone steadily accrete into a din until a bell or a keyboard interrupts it, like a puff of air on the seeds of a dandelion clock. At the Masonic Temple, the idea was there, but the execution was not. It was almost as if they were afraid to be too dissonant and dynamic during their hometown farewell. They discarded such fears in Raleigh, of course. It's part of the reason they came. Their studio rendering of Epoch is a perfect testament to that growth, with beautiful and brittle moments squeezed together until they almost touched. It is wonderfully layered, its sonic idiosyncrasies tucked into recesses without being hidden. Once again, though, they ran into problems in trying to determine how far they should push it, a question that hounded them for weeks. Could it be more damaged? Was it more plain? The band went mad looking for the answer. On July 23rd, they'd had enough. Brad noticed that Justin seemed especially checked out that day, irritated by the endless textural explorations. Knowing that Phil and Joe may never notice how withdrawn Justin was, let alone confront him about it, Brad broke the spell.
And Brad was like, you want to be done? Are you done with this? And I was like, yeah. And we just sort of packed up and they left and that was it.
Actually, that wasn't quite it. When everyone else wanted to know what was happening, Justin explained to Joe, the first person with whom he'd played, and the person with whom his views now diverged most dramatically, that this wasn't what music should be.
And I remember Justin being like, music and songs connect to people's souls, and they like help people live their lives. What you're talking about is something that has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. I don't want to be a part of that at all. And then realizing that, it was just like 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 that's how quick it escalated, and the band was done.
Like he had an online gambling addiction during a huge part of this. So like he's like giving himself night sweats and like going through this whole weird private addiction meltdown thing. And we just see the receiving end of that. We're so like running hot and passionate and tired and broke and everything, you know? And I sort of remember being mad at Justin about it just because he wasn't honest with us. But I understood, like I was bored of parts of it too.
And on that July afternoon, pretending was no longer sustainable.
I was like, I had the clarity moment of like, this has to be done. This is not going to get better. Not like this. And I just remember us all sitting on the front porch, and it was not a antagonistic conversation, but it was sad and it was real.
A day after that doomed practice, 1,000 copies of Silent Signs arrived on Justin and Christy's doorstep on Farrell. The band had spent nearly $1,600 on that second edition weeks earlier. They now had one show left. Almost every copy spent the next decade in a storage shed behind Phil and Heather's home in Durham, to be enjoyed mostly by mice. Chapter 10. Justin shared that sentiment, stunned that he was suddenly without a band, even if he knew it was necessary. He had clung to it, even on miserable days.
It's so funny, like, Brad wouldn't have said that I don't want to do this anymore. I would have never left. I mean, maybe not never, but it would have been a lot uglier.
You would have stuck in it.
Yeah.
In that haze, he floundered. He was still in the throes of mono, and his relationship with Christy was crumbling almost in time with that of his best friends. One day, while sleeping through the fever, he dreamt of being struck by lightning, a sensation so visceral it caused his jaw to clamp down and crack one of his false front teeth. When he woke up, the damaged tooth suggested the sight of crushed veneer, an image he wrote later into a plea for this new relationship to last a year. He called it Skinny Love. It was living in a black comedy musical, Christy said. When he wrote Skinny Love, we were on a couch in our underwear, eating Chinese food or whatever you do at home. He was like, I've got this song, and I think it might be one of the best songs I've ever written. He played it for me, and I was like, I know it's about me, but it's gold. It's a song about him leaving me, but it's a beautiful song. For the rest of the summer, Justin continued to wrestle with what came after disaster.
Vern was depressed, and he wasn't doing the right things to take care of himself, and so he needed to get somewhere where he was going to be forced to do the right things, or his mom was nearby to hold him accountable to doing the right things.
On August 10th, less than 3 weeks after the fracture, the trio of Brad, Phil, and Joe made a MySpace page under the name Megafaun, a term Brad adopted from a book Katie was reading about the Quaternary extinction. DeYarmond Edison had one more show to play, joining Chapel Hill bands the Kingsbury Manx and Schooner for a three-way bill at King's on Friday, August 25th. Before they could even make that last stand, Brad told King's co-owner Paul Seiler they had a new trio. He volunteered Megafaun to open for Byzantine Portland band Menomina at King's on September 24th. No one remembers practicing for the last DeYarmond Edison show. They didn't announce that it was the end and only told close friends.
And we just decided the noble thing, I remember thinking even then the cool look is to leave everything intact and just walk away from it and leave it alone and just be done.
At some point, someone posted DeYarmond Edison's mostly finished EP to MySpace. But when Kings misspelled their name online, DeyaMand, Edison, they didn't bother asking for a correction. No one remembers much about the show either. Everyone recalls that first Megafaun gig, even though they had very little time to prepare their set, much less write new material. Phil again offered up Lazy Suicide, a tune about DeYarmond Edison's shaky circumstances that had tellingly gone nowhere with the band. During their earliest rehearsals, Megafaun would sometimes push the song toward the half-hour mark, luxuriating in their opportunity to improvise. Holy shit, that was awesome, man. Brad says at the end of one such recorded take. His need to help explain everything in DeYarmond Edison suddenly gone and replaced by a glow. Phil just giggles in his all-consuming way, like he's just discovered the route to happiness. They claimed Where We Belong for themselves too, newly emboldened to pursue aggressive textures as a trio. Brad had written the song for DeYarmond Edison in response to his sense that the band was troubled. Love's tale, you can set it free, come back and it's meant to be, they sang at the start of the second verse, a double allusion to Justin's restlessness and their old blues rock Stand By, Set Me Free. Writing that, Brad remembers, gave him the confidence to call it quits when he did.
Love's tale, you can set it free. Come back and it's meant to be.
In turn, proving that Megafaun could do what DeYarmond Edison dared not try became an early motivation.
That being obviously one of the first goals of Megafaun was to like realize that thing that Justin wouldn't allow.
Even though I was very democratic and open, there was a lot of times where I wish I could just control everything.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's certainly probably the thing that I struggled with the most. Sort of like, I can do it, but also I need all of you.
There had been strange standoffs all summer. When Heather had lunch with Justin, for instance, Brad and Phil went silent with her for days. So she came to the house I was sharing with Kyle and slept on our couch.
I knew in that moment that Phil and Brad needed like full fucking cheerleader vibes, like, or they were gonna hit the bottom. And I was living with both of them and in a committed relationship with one of them. So I think I just invested in championing that next move.
But that September afternoon, Brad showed up a few hours early to hang out, hoping to preserve his friendship before Justin headed north to Eau Claire. Justin asked if he could play Brad some new songs he'd recorded. The prospect made Brad anxious, but he agreed.
Like when you see an ex,
Who has a new partner?
yeah, or like something, and you're like not mad at them or anything, but there is like nervous energy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like everyone's still sort of trying to counter this new version of this old experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Justin played Skinny Love and Flume for Brad that afternoon, telling him one sounded like T-Rex. Brad loved the songs, and he started to understand what had happened to DeYarmond Edison, why his old friend needed new space.
But he also probably was realizing he was making things that he wanted to make for the first time in a long time without a committee weighing in on it. I don't fucking blame him. I wouldn't have wanted to share for Emma either if I was writing that music. If I knew it was coming from that real of a place, I would want to think about how I present it at least.
By November, Justin loaded everything he could into his CRV, grabbed whatever was left at Farrell, and began the 17-hour drive back to Eau Claire.
And when I got home, I remember this panic feeling of like getting into my parents' house and like I'm moving back, but Jesus Christ, I can't be in this house. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to my dad's cabin. Spent a couple months up there.
His parents, Gil and Justine, worried more about their oldest son coming home than they had about his leaving.
We didn't sense that there was acrimony or anger. He was sick. I mean, sick and tired. You know, it's hard to feel good when you don't feel well. Mm-hmm.
He loaded his gear into the cabin an hour northwest of Eau Claire during the dead of winter and kept working with the songs and sounds he'd started exploring on Farrell. He kept in touch with Kelly and Ivan from the Rosebuds, listening to emailed mixes of their new album, and he replied with CDRs and letters, ending one to Kelly with BONAVIER, Good Winter, Love, Justin. Justin worked on the Rosebuds album with Mark Paulson of Ticonderoga, who had just endured a band breakup with longtime pals too. He asked Justin to join Ticonderoga. They began tracking new songs at Mark's home studio in late February 2007. Bowerbirds' Phil Moore even rejoined the band. They sang Hazelton, a song DeYarmond Edison had never touched, as a trio. They added cataracts of electronics and a woodwind lacework to Frail Cell, with more countering and then chasing Justin's melody. A dream for someone who had contemplated quitting music because more was so good only a few months earlier. They all contributed songs in parts, a posthumous realization of DeYarmond Edison's dream. The bittersweet jangle of Mark's Blaspheme, particularly its heavy strumming pattern, helped shape how Justin finished Skinny Love. And Justin continued to test his falsetto and its harmonic possibilities on Hands Up, a song that seemed to refract the Rosebud's sense of cool. When Justin offered up a new tune named Blood Bank, Mark told him it sounded too much like Springsteen. Joke's on me, Mark says now, of what became a defining Bon Iver tune. Those sessions came as a surprise to the members of Megafaun, who thought Justin was done with bands. That sense of betrayal stung, maybe more than the breakup itself.
I can remember why I was mad. It was like, I felt like what he was so mad at us for in Eau Claire, he asked a lot of us. And then when we got to North Carolina and he got what he needed out of it, it wasn't about that. It was about his actual ambitions. And once he was shown and given the opportunity to participate without us, he jumped at it.
In some respects, though, this revived Ticonderoga was Justin's brief attempt to reckon with what had just happened with his best friends. Their song Tour was a survey of the sadness that stemmed from dissolution. Mark sang the first half above his own strident violin, in part about Ticonderoga's painful split. Justin took the back half, essentially recapitulating the end of DeYarmond Edison and the concomitant loss of brotherhood. 1,000 shows, sharing clothes, he sang, fitting close between you both, I'd have died there if I could.
That is like my direct reaction to breaking up with the boys. Yeah, it's just like a love letter to those guys.
Justin spent the next 2 months touring with the Rosebuds, still mixing the songs he'd recorded in Wisconsin with headphones in the back of the van. When they returned to Raleigh, he worked with Ticonderoga a little more, then headed back to Wisconsin, the 9 songs finally done. He had decided to call them For Emma Forever ago. Ticonderoga never finished its EP. Chapter 11. Megafaun worked feverishly to finish recording their first 6 songs in the music school where Phil taught and in Carson's yoga studio. While Justin had retreated to the northern woods to work in solitude, they embraced their newfound freedom, practicing constantly, collaborating enthusiastically, and playing at almost every available opportunity. That spring, Megafaun booked their own short tours. They self-released Bury the Square in colored vinyl pouches that Heather had sewn and that they'd stamped with their name. It was an ambitious but compact album, its half-dozen tracks spooling out of a central idea. If the songs were interesting enough, they could become open-ended prompts for improvisation, musical or theatrical. In those early days, his robe involved a skit that sometimes found Brad and Phil quarreling, and the crowd wondering if maybe this wasn't an act. The Bickett Gallery residencies had given them the confidence to write, sing, and lead. The breakup gave them the freedom to run with it. That spring, Justin put a few songs from For Emma Forever ago on MySpace, and the word slowly started to spread. He began receiving label offers. Without DeYarmond Edison's terminal year in Raleigh, neither Megafaun nor Bon Iver may have ever happened, let alone their rapid rise. Their experiment gave them a keen sense of what they wanted from music. A familiarity with failure had also given them the confidence to trust their instincts. Before he released For Emma, Justin told Volume 1 that the music was dug up, plastered on thick, drunken, on purpose, talking about the songs as lifelines. Still, he encountered extreme skepticism about his new fondness for falsetto almost everywhere he turned. His dad wondered what the fuck he was doing. Michelle Malone didn't like it. When Justin sent a CDR of For Emma Forever ago to Mike Perry, the Wisconsin author and songwriter he had backed alongside Phil, Mike's enthusiasm was guarded at best.
The music I was working on, I felt explosive about.
Sure.
But I, in many ways, felt that way. I did feel like there was something different, but I had no reason to believe any. The first year or two of when Bon happened, I was fucking ecstatic. Mm-hmm. It wasn't because it was being successful, it was because I did something for me.
Megafaun faced similar obstacles. In their first few months as a band, they played many of the same rooms DeYarmond Edison had recently packed for a smattering of people. Their ardor was obvious, but their songs were so loose that they could sometimes alienate an audience without warning. I would defend them back then by saying they were trying to be ambitiously good, implicitly drawing a reductive comparison to Justin's more direct yearning. Even Brad and Phil's mom, Winnie, suggested they just ask Justin if they could borrow some of those old Mount Vernon songs.
That first year was so, like, directionless in a way. You know what I mean?
Profound,
like, we were just looking so hard for it.
Oh, yeah.
Those first 6 months, I think, were, like, the real... That was just,
yeah, it was scary.
So, what are we doing?
Late in 2007, Jeff Hunt, the founder of the legendary experimental label Table of the Elements, asked Megafaun if it had plans to release Bury the Square properly. Hunt had worked with many of Megafaun's heroes. He offered them a spot on Radium, Table of the Elements' new imprint. The back of the Radium edition of Bury the Square boasted, "Wearing earnestness across the chest and abstraction along the sleeves. In this band, orthodoxy and unorthodoxy flow together as one." This is precisely what DeYarmond Edison had moved to North Carolina to accomplish. In late October 2007, Bon Iver and Megafaun shared a two-night stand at the Nucleus, the small cafe and venue attached to Racy's, their longtime coffee shop haunt back in Eau Claire. "The boys are back in town," the poster exclaimed with 3 exclamation marks. Bon Iver, Megafaun, and announcing the DeYarmond Edison reunion. They played their own sets and attempted a handful of rough songs together, though Brad admits they were, quote, embarrassingly unprepared. They scribbled their signatures on a poster, framed and hanging in Racy's even now. In September 2009, Megafaun joined Bon Iver for a spate of shows in the American West, far from their respective North Carolina and Wisconsin homes. Each night, Justin would talk about how honored he was for his best friends to be there. Megafaun would saunter back on stage to sing Worried Mind with Justin's new quartet. Led in Joe's Tender Quiver, the song is a mea culpa for a feud that didn't have to happen. An anthem of acceptance and an admission of mutual guilt, it was the perfect act of compromise. "Come on, ease your mind," they cooed with the crowds, arms often around one another.
I saw a guardedness that I had never seen in Phil and Brad when they would see each other, or the way that, there was something like so different and so deep and so complicated, like seeing your friend's success and struggling, and it seemed kind of awkward, like they didn't know how to rebuild it, man, but they were trying.
A year later, Megafaun welcomed Justin into its own universe back in North Carolina for a series of concerts. For the show's lodestar, they took Alan Lomax's Sounds of the South, a 1993 box set that gathered his 1960 titles from the Southern Folk Heritage Series. For their collaborators, Megafaun took the Elastic Virginia brass band Fight the Big Bull and 2 of Megafaun's favorite singers in the world, Sharon Van Etten and, well, Justin. Megafaun gave these songs the respect of simultaneous reverence and reinvention. They delivered a few in traditional arrangements, but spun others out into free jazz bedlam and electroacoustic montage, trying to get at their own new truth hiding in these old words. Simple country hymns became luminescent indie rock or earnest devotionals. If their Worried Mind sing-alongs in 2009 reflected the quartet's emotional growth since DeYarmond Edison's demise, Sounds of the South represented their technical development. Justin had rarely seemed more comfortable as a singer. Megafaun sounded like it could do anything. After Sounds of the South, Megafaun toured relentlessly for 2 years, going on runs with the likes of the Hold Steady and the Mountain Goats, following the release of their robust, self-titled third album. They even took Sounds of the South to Ohio the next May, and 2 years later to the Sydney Opera House. But that material represented a culmination of sorts, the apogee of everything they had tried to do during DeYarmond Edison's residency at Bickett and had done as Megafaun. Justin had even been there to participate. During consecutive nights in April 2014, Megafaun played marathon sets at the Pinhook, their favorite club in Durham, with a fourth member who mostly lurked in the shadows, playing guitar and bass, and stepping forward only to cover Johnny Cash's Unchained. It was Justin, of course. The next day, the quartet turned north for a few more shows, with Justin touring as their unannounced sideman. And then, barring the occasional charity gig or festival appearance, Megafaun mostly disappeared too. During the last decade, Joe, Justin, Brad, and Phil have slipped in and out of one another's musical lives, like puzzle pieces whose interlocking grooves are forever morphing. They all appeared, for instance, on Bon Iver's fourth LP, I, with Brad managing the militia-like cast of dozens who played on the album. Phil flew down to El Paso to add piano and organ, while they integrated an archival sample of Joe playing Shaker on The Gorgeous Faith. Joe also bowed a cymbal on Bon Iver's 22 A Million, effectively closing a circle, since that's one of the sounds that broke DeYarmond Edison apart. Brad and Justin have played together in a collaboration with the National's Aaron Dessner as Big Red Machine, too. Brad and Phil have worked on a dazzling string of folk rock records together, adding the kind of textural depth that DeYarmond Edison began to explore and Megafaun more fully realized. They played with his Gold Messenger, William Tyler, The Weather Station, and old-time legend Alice Gerrard. Phil and Justin, meanwhile, have teamed for tracks used by Kanye West and previously teamed for Kathleen Edwards' Voyageur, when she and Justin were a couple. In 2011, Phil and Justin played a medley on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. They continue to write together too, even collaborating on new Bon Iver songs. Phil, Justin, and Brad also partnered on a record by Indigo Girl Amy Ray. Brad, Phil, and Jan Westerlin, DeYarmond Edison's original drummer, cut an album with Annie DeFranco during the COVID-19 pandemic. Justin, Phil, and DeYarmond Edison's second drummer, Brian Moan, issued an album as blues rock firecrackers at the Shouting Matches in 2013, aptly titled Grown Ass Man. The peak, though, arrived in 2016 when they were all invited to contribute to a Grateful Dead tribute album, itself a fundraiser for the AIDS-fighting nonprofit Red Hot. The four reconvened for the first time in years at April Base, Justin's home studio outside of Eau Claire, with a special guest who would have broken their brains as teenagers, Bruce Hornsby. He led the stately way through the first verse of Black Muddy River, a song about how the struggle to make your own way in the world can mean hardship and loneliness. Justin took the second verse, his voice shifting into the familiar low range of Silent Signs. They all met in the chorus, unified by the song's embrace of hard-won, bittersweet wisdom. Halfway through the 8-minute beauty, the central rhythm recedes. Using his cassette deck, Joe traces a noisy filigree across Phil's wispy organ and Hornsby's faltering piano. It sounds an awful lot like what they were doing on that July day a decade earlier, back on Feral, when Brad asked Justin if they were ready to be done. They credited the cover to Bruce Hornsby and DeYarmond Edison, the summation of decades of dreams.
You're looking up at the waves.
It's funny, like I remember having all these visions of what I thought it would look like when I was in high school, and I feel like the weird psychic part of it is like I've seen those come true. You know, even down to like how a certain tour bus hang would feel, or like all these other things. And even if they're not things that I've personally accomplished or just been with Justin as he's done it, you get to feel like I can sit on his bus and be like, we're still in this, you know. It's his thing, obviously, but like there's a part of us that's I always feel included in it.
Epilogue. I wish I could say here that everyone has lived happily ever after, that the conflicts and circumstances that led to DeYarmond Edison's end have evaporated altogether with time. That is partly true, at least. After spending perhaps too many hours with them in the last 3 years, asking them to plumb their memories for pain or the address of every home they've ever shared, I can firmly say what you probably intuit by now. These four love each other, and no matter what else may pass, always will. Sitting with Joe and Carson at their kitchen table well after dusk one night, I watched Joe furrow his brow and listened to him circle his words. He tried to articulate what it had felt like to lose this particular friend, the second person with whom he'd ever played music, and never understand precisely why. And for Justin, it seemed always like a solution of regret dissolved in nostalgia, so that he perpetually wondered what might have been if he had been able to make it through that final miasmic summer. When he sent over the trove of files that eventually shaped part of Epoch, the files for DeYarmond Edison's unfinished EP were labeled, "Maybe it's in the past," with the equivocal adverb doing the bulk of the work.
Bigger than any of the music, certainly bigger than any of the music we came up with, was the depth of our relationships. And the depth of which we were able to hold another human being as accountable as we were holding one another as 17, 18, 19-year-old kids far outweighs any of the music we played in that band, far outweighs any of the music I've made since then, I think.
But the end of DeYarmond Edison made so many other things possible, a moment that propelled not only its four members in new directions, but many others too. Bon Iver and Megafaun funneled out of DeYarmond Edison, of course, but so did a dozen other projects, from gangs to Volcano Choir. Would Phil have ever made the wonderful Southland Mission, for instance, had DeYarmond Edison trudged ahead? Would Joe have emerged as Grandma Sparrow, truly one of rock's most whimsical characters this side of Zappa? And what would modern music, writ large, full stop, sound like had Justin never sung A Satisfied Mind in his falsetto, as Brad suggested it, and then spent the last 15 years discovering the new things it could do? All of these elements existed in embryonic form in DeYarmond Edison, but they likely would have never flourished so fully had they been confined by the compromise of a quartet. That's my real takeaway from diving back into the world of DeYarmond Edison. Blame is rarely useful to assign. If anyone is guilty of doing something wrong in this scenario, then everyone is. By and large, however, I think everyone was trying their best, learning as they grew, growing as they learned, making mistakes along the way. The lesson this story has given me, and maybe you, stubborn pride is less important than the chance to get closer. And it's the things we build and hold together, not the things that fall apart, that matter most. This is Grayson Haver Currin, the narrator for this book. My voice was engineered by Allie Rogers at Betty's outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Betty's is owned by Amelia Meath and Nick Sanborn, who was at one point the bassist in the band Megafaun.
That completes our mini-series, culminating with the end of DeYarmond Edison's story, and we hope you enjoyed it. To order the DeYarmond Edison box set Epoch, including 5 LPs, 4 CDs, and a 120-page book by Grayson Haver Currin, or anything else from Secretly Group, please visit us at secretlystore.com. This Secretly Society podcast is an original production of Secretly Group.